Good afternoon. Welcome to the Diversion Authority Finance Committee meeting of October 27th. Welcome everybody here. The first order of business is going to be a roll call. Don, would you please help with that?
Mayor Dardis.
Here.
Dr. Mahoney. Mr. Peterson. Mr. Jacobson.
Here.
Mr. Costin.
Here.
Ms. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Redlinger.
Here.
Mr. Steen.
Here.
Mr. Pepcorn. Mayor Carlson. Mr. Reeds. A quorum is present.
Thank you, Don. Second order of business is to approve the minutes of September 22nd, 2021. We'll be having a voice call on that. Do I have a motion?
Steen moves to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Steen. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Mr. Costin seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of September 22nd. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 3 is the approve the order of the agenda as has been presented and distributed. Could I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Redlinger. Is there a second? Mr. Steen seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the order of the agenda as distributed. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item number 4 is the approval of the bills. Mr. Costin, City of Fargo.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The bills listing for the month is presented on page 7 of 202, $10,073,433.68. A large component of that bill would be reimbursing the City of Fargo for in-town flood levy projects completed this year, or work in progress at least. Other than that, there aren't any unusual bills in the bills listing, so I would suggest a motion to approve.
Steen moves to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Costin. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. That's been moved and seconded. The approval of the bills requires a roll call vote. Don, would you please help us with that?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes?
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Costin.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Reeds.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Item number 5 is a finance report. Mr. Costin, City of Fargo.
Thank you. Page 30 of 202, the cumulative accountability report. The spend for 2021 has been $90,314,371. And over on the right-hand side, the grand total spend life to date, $736,625,608. If you move on to the balance sheet on page 31, again, we have a significant balance, $105,388,543. I will comment that as this matures, and I think I've said this in past, but on the left margin, there's additional cash accounts that are being populated because of the master indenture of trust. And as a point of reference, on October 12th, we've wired out $16 million to the Bank of North Dakota that will sit in a P3 reserve fund custodied by the Bank of North Dakota as trustee. And also, we've received a request that I think that's being evaluated for $3 million to pay the stipend on the party that bid that was not chosen as a successful bidder. So that will likely clear in November. On to page 32, with regard to the budget of $219,900, we're at about $90,548,000. So clearly underneath the overall budget levels. Other than that, I didn't have any further comments.
Thank you, Mr. Costin. Are there any questions of Mr. Costin? I would entertain a motion to approve the finance report.
Steen moves to approve.
Is there a second, please?
Mahoney, second.
Mayor Mahoney seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the finance report as presented by Mr. Costin. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none. Don, would you please take the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobson,
Yes.
Mr. Costin,
Yes.
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger,
Yes.
Mr. Steen,
Yes.
Mr. Reeds.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Item number 6 is the Executive Director's Financial Report. Mr. Paulson.
Oh, thank you, Chairman Dardis. Not much different to report than the last few months. You can see from the level 1 summary, obviously a majority of our costs to date this year have been in the lands. Oh, I think somebody on the phone, if you could go on mute, please. Thank you. Majority of our expenditures have been in the lands and impacted property mitigation as well as the third-party MOU. So that's really funding majority of the land acquisition costs, and then we've had a lot of utility relocates occurring this year in anticipation of the channel construction as well as the core construction on the southern embankment. Overall, I'm not seeing any major concerns within the budget. As reported out for the last 3 to 4 months, we are anticipating to be significantly under budget for the year. That is just due to some of the delay in the procurement process and the timing of when we had anticipated those costs to be expended. So I don't think I need to dig into level 2 unless there's any questions from the committee. But certainly at this point, doesn't look like there is any concerns. So.
Questions for Mr. Paulson? All right, thank you. This is for information only, so this is not an actionable item. The next order of business will be the contracting actions. Mr. Paulson?
Thank you, Chairman Dardis. We have a few contracting actions for the committee to consider today. The first one is agreement with Ndsu. I did talk with the diversion board about a discussion I had with Ndsu concerning the economic impact study of the P3 and the core projects going on during construction. Maybe just a little background. It appeared during the Sanford Hospital construction, there was an increase in sales tax revenue, an increase in workforce issues related to the construction of that facility. Obviously we're doubling that, if not more, depending on the timing of the core projects. And so I've been having a lot of presentations and talking to a lot of different groups around town that just keep asking me the same questions, what's going to happen in the next few years. So this was something that the Diversion Authority Board felt they would like to pursue. I did work with Ndsu and the researchers that would be conducting the economic impact study, and we did scope out the study, and the anticipated fee is $35,844.
Question, Mayor Mahoney.
Joel, I think it might be helpful to us sometime as well to present to the board the economic impact, because we get the questions from the chamber people, how many thousand workers, how's it going to affect housing, what's it going to do. I think it might be good for our talking points in the elevator if people are asking us, you screwing up wages or what's happening. Amazon's come down. We've seen some wage increases throughout the community because of that. We've seen variability in work abilities for people to take their own shifts and other things. So it's becoming a more competitive environment in our community, but there are a variety of reasons, even beyond the diversion, that are doing that. But it seems that some people want to say the diversion is causing a huge impact to that. Is it 2,000 workers? Is it 5? Is it 7? How many is it that we need for the project? So I think it'd be helpful just for us as a board sometimes, some of these things that come out of these studies that you get, just to share it with us so we know too. Bernie knows a lot of people in the chamber, and they'll be asking him questions, and it's just nice for us to know, what was now maybe modified, refined, and we have a better handle on what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely, Mayor. And I've been getting a lot of those same questions too. And a lot of them I can't answer right now because I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know what things are going to look like. And two, and I'm not an economist, so I don't know, how all these complex things are going to play together. And so this is really going to kind of give us that roadmap. And a lot of the board members have those talking points, but also the chamber, the EDC, the housing folks, they're all asking these questions. Industry's asking about labor force erosion and wage increases and all these big issues. And they're all tied to what we're doing here, obviously, and but a lot of it is market conditions that are just going to occur. But if we can better understand those, I think we can have better conversations about what's going on and at least make people aware for their own businesses and their own endeavors as far as their short and long-term strategic planning for those organizations. So I think it would be well, I recommend looking into this because it's difficult for me, and I know for the board members, to just say, well, I don't know what's going to happen. And, you know, a lot of times the diversion gets blamed for, you know, the negative side effects, not the positive side effects of doing a project. And this would give us some guidance on how to kind of put together some of that information. I just want to note as well, we did talk with Ndsu, but it is not included in this fee, about doing a phase 2 economic impact study, which would occur after construction or leading up to the end of construction, but really what is the economic impact of the removal of the floodplain within the metro community, you know, and how does that entice growth, those sorts of things. But that would be down the road, I would say. Right now, the immediate need, it appears, would be to have some clarity on what impacts during construction are going to look like.
Earlier in the day at the public outreach meeting, Ms. Darling kind of outlined a lot of that also, that she'll be having some community engagement meetings, both from the standpoint from the diversion as well as jointly with the P3. So great points of being concerned about all of those types of things and all the questions we're all getting. But I think that this is an absolute necessary step that we move forward on as well. Please continue.
Mr. Chair, do you want to wait till all the contracting actions are on before we have a motion?
Would you like to do them one at a time or all of them? That's up to the committee.
Well, there's not a lot of money. I think we probably could do all 4. If Joel would go through them, then we could do that.
I'm sorry, Mayor, I didn't understand your point.
We can wait till he does all 4 because it's not a lot of money. If this was 30 million, I think we would want to vote it separately. But
Yes, sir. Please continue.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. The second one for consideration is with High Road Partners HR Solutions. We did do a RFP to look for an HR consultant to work with the administration staff at the MFDA. The best value was selected as the High Road Partners. Right now, we're having Cass County administer our HR services. As we continue to hire more people at the DA, it became apparent between both Cass County and the DA that we need to have some additional assistance in setting up HR policies, administrating those policies, implementing performance improvement metrics if needed, and those sorts of things. And so really that is what this contract is for. We hope to continue long-term with High Roads if things go well. This will get us up and started and allow us to begin working with them.
Any questions on that?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next one is with Schatz and Associates. This is for really a policy development support consultant for the board themselves. Mr. Schatz used to work for the Fargo School Board for many years. And in talking with him, he kind of showed the policies that Fargo School Board had developed in that framework. And I think there's been a number of board members that have been in discussions about, well, it's probably time to get something like that in place for the DA board, just to clarify roles and responsibilities between the board and myself, the executive director, as well as having internal policies for myself with my staff as well. And so this is a master service agreement for those professional services from Mr. Schatz.
Questions on that?
I have a question.
Mr. Steen?
Joel, I noticed there's no dollar in here. Is there a cap, or do you have no clue, or what are we talking about here?
So this is just for the initiation of the master service agreement. The contracts are going to be fairly low. I think we have for this round one, which has already kind of started, we're looking at probably about $16,000 for the board work that Mr. Schatz will do in developing the policies and getting those to ultimately get to the board level for approval or discussion. There is a governance group that's been identified that has been consulting in the services for Mr. Schatz and where we're going with that. And so this today is just the master service agreement. The additional scopes will come after this. So,
All right, thank you.
yep.
Same question.
Any additional questions for Mr. Paulson? Okay, thank you.
All right, and then the last one is for Casserole Water, just a utility relocation project that we have with some of their facilities. Won't go into the detailed scope of it, but would recommend approval for the $11,300.
Move to approve all the contract actions.
Is there a second, please?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Steen, moved by Mayor Mahoney. Is there any further discussion or questions on these 4 action items? Not, Don, would you please call a roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Costin.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Reeds.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Next order of business is the Diversion Authority Board approval of the 2021 cash budget adjustments. Is that, Mr.
Yes,
Paulson, please?
that's correct, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So I have one proposed budget adjustment for the committee to consider. This is, we had set up originally in the DA budget a $6 million budget item for the stipends for the development teams that did not win. And so it was initially contemplated with 4 teams, $2 million apiece to the 3 development teams that did not win. As we moved through the procurement process, the board's aware, we had lost 1 development team during the injunction, and then a second development team pulled out because of their own internal reasons. And we ended with 2 proposals. And so we are, the DA has already determined in previous meetings that we would offer the proposer $3 million out of that $6 million budget. Which really leaves $3 million basically under, we would be $3 million under budget. However, during negotiations with the city of Horace a number of years ago, it was indicated in the MOU or in the agreement with Horace that the Diversion Authority would provide some infrastructure funding for the city, and that was determined to be $5 million. And so so far, that $5 million has not been included in the DA budget, so it's been a kind of a bogey outside that we've needed to take care of. We did not know when the city would be requesting those funds. The first half of those funds come after financial close with the developer. That's the way the agreement was set up. And so the city is requesting the first half of those funds this year. And so in order to accommodate those in the 2021 budget, we're proposing that we move $2.5 million over to create the City of Horace Infrastructure Fund. Ultimately, we're still $500,000 under budget for this line item, and it'll basically be closed out because we'll be making the P3 payment to the developer that did not win the contract. So.
Any questions on the item? Mr. Steen?
Just to clarify, Joe, we're just moving this up basically into this year's budget. We haven't changed the total amounts for the Horace agreement or anything.
No, the Horace agreement is what it is. It's $5 million. They're requesting $2.5 million of it. We don't have it budgeted for this year, and so we'd like to take it out of this, the stipend budget area and move it over to get that set up.
Mr. Steen?
I'll move to approve the proposed budget adjustment of 2.5 million.
Second.
Second by Mahoney. Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Any other questions?
Is this going to go for their Flush to Fargo project, or which project are they using it for?
I think it's, they got some water main projects going on right now, and so it's current projects that's under construction within the community. I don't think it's a connection to Fargo, but so it would be going to reimburse some of the work that's been already done on the
That is
water
a good,
projects.
that is a great question, though. There, with the MOU with the city of Horace, there were no parameters or direction as to how it had to be used for infrastructure. I mean, it was just a dollar amount.
I'll refer to John because he probably drafted the agreement, but that's my understanding is that it needed to be used for infrastructure within the city of Horace.
That's correct. It had to be used for infrastructure in Horace, and it has to be, the city has to take the lead on it. Our position was that the Diversion Authority wasn't going to build any infrastructure, just going to be a funding source. And so they have to have local money they're putting in, and then they're using this to help with the infrastructure. In exchange for that, they waived any right to contest through the contested case hearing. And in addition, they agreed to cooperate because with the project because part of the diversion channel runs through the city. Also, part of the southern embankment and the control structure run directly through the city of Horace. So we needed their assistance.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Any other questions? We have a motion on the floor. Don, would you please call a roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Costin.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Reeds.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don.
That's all I have.
That's
Mr.
all you
Chair.
have. All right.
Yep.
Item number 8 is the update on the final financial close of the Red River Alliance. Mr. Shockley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So congratulations to the Finance Committee and the Diversion Authority. We reached financial close on October 13th of this month. I thought I would give you a one-sheet explanation of the cost savings that we were able to obtain in the financial close. I met with Commissioner Steen before. The red is savings. It's not negative, it's savings. Maybe we should put it in green, but I thought that this really did a good job of explaining what happened during the financial bit or closing. So if you'll recall back in June, we received the proposals from both of the teams. The preferred proposer that was selected on June 18th was Red River Valley Alliance. That's the developer that we closed with. Right after the board made the decision to select Red River Valley Alliance, the finance team kind of kicked into high gear, and we spent a significant amount of time working with Red River Valley Alliance and working through some potential cost savings. And that included the use of the private activity bonds, the designation of the green bonds, sitting in on multiple investor calls with them and working through some other potential savings. And so briefly, I'll just cover what were the instruments that we used to accomplish the savings. So first and foremost was the Pabs allocation. Thank you to Cass County. Cass County held the TEFRA hearing and approved the use of the bonds. The Pabs bonds were issued by the Wisconsin PFA. And those are bonds that are utilized for the transportation elements that are being constructed by the developer. That would include the county bridges, the rail bridges, and the interstate bridges. The second item is when Red River Valley Alliance had their bid proposal. They included $200 million of taxable muni bonds. We were able to agree with them to substitute in, instead of the $200 million of taxable muni bonds, we were able to secure a placement with a MetLife with MetLife Insurance Company for a private placement loan, which is in the form of a note for $200 million. And we realized both certainty on the interest rate and cost savings. And then finally, they have a floating revolver loan of about $650 million. And that has a variable interest rate because it is a floater. And we worked with them to involve a hedge company, which is a hedging transaction where they buy the underlying interest out of the variable rate and give a fixed interest rate. And so they take the risk of the interest rate going up, and they also take the benefit of the interest rate going down. But what it does is it gives you certainty, and it was able to remove some of the uncertainty and the risk in their bid. And so then we were faced with, we have savings, how are we going to apply these savings? And so I'll just briefly go through the sheet. On the pre-bid estimate, so the bid that we received from the developer and the proposers contained really three components. Your yearly MAP payment, which is an availability payment. So MAP stands for monthly availability payment. That's your total. And so the engineer's estimate was $23,850,000 for annual payment. The maintenance MAP, which is once again monthly annual availability payment, and that's for the maintenance component. That was estimated by the engineer to be $8,199,000. And then our total milestone payments, which are the payments that are paid over the course of construction, that was estimated to be $867 million and some change. The winning proposer, RRVA, their submission on the capital map was $25 million and some change. Their maintenance map came in lower than our engineer's estimate at $5,915,000 and some change. And then the milestone payments were very, very close to the engineer's estimate at $870 million. And so all of those savings items that we talked about, we felt that it was in the best interest of the project and the taxpayers to lower the pressure on your long-term debt obligations. Because keep in mind, the AP payments are due after construction. And so it's really a component of your long-term debt. And so we've put that savings into the availability payments. And so what that did was that reduced the annual capital availability payment to $24 million and some change, which is very, very close to the engineer's estimate. That resulted in a savings of $50 million and a little bit of change to the project for the capital payments. And then we didn't change anything to the maintenance availability payments, and we made no changes to the milestone payments. And so overall, it was a really successful financial close. It's a big milestone for the project, and just really good news. Now it's time to have the engineers start building the project. I can answer any questions you might have. That's trying to distill it down into a simple one-page explanation with no flow charts or anything, so.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Mayor Mahoney?
I'm only disappointed you didn't do your 5-page presentation, John, but congratulations, this is great stuff. And City of Fargo is happy to receive and some change anytime you want to give it to us.
Mr. Costin?
I had a question with regard to the maintenance, and maybe I was thinking about my question versus what you were saying, but could you just reiterate when it says year one maintenance amount of 8.2 million? Am I to presume that then that's projected out each and every year, and so the trajectory in the budget would be at that level? But you're saying the bid came in at 5.9 or about 30% below.
Correct.
So there's a lot of blue sky in the budget for maintenance costs if they manifest.
That's correct. And from my perspective, working on the P3 side, the one thing that I really like about P3 transactions is the transparency. So I'll use a school building, for example. When the voters approve a bond issue for a school building, they're only voting on the capital portion of the building. They don't see all of the operations components. They don't see how much it takes to keep the lights on or the hallways clean or the grounds mowed. With P3, you get both a capital payment and an operations and maintenance payment. So they bid in the $5 million, which was lower than our expected operations. And so that's a fixed operational amount for a term of 30 years. And so Paul and EY and myself were working on recrunching the numbers now that we have financial close to see how this affects the overall financial plan. But the good news is we do have more room on the maintenance side, and we also have more money flowing down to the maintenance because the debt's a little bit lower. And so, I mean, we're moving in the right direction. We have a lot of years left on the project, but we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Mayor Mahoney.
John, just to the taxpayer, so they signed up for a sales tax that's gonna go so many years. The advantage of a good financial close is the years that it ends will come sooner. Would that be the best way to interpret that?
Yes, so, taking a step back for the taxpayers, what the Diversion Authority has done overall is good for the taxpayers. You've sought out the lowest cost of capital with the WIFIA loan, and you've reduced your cost with the P3, and your operations and maintenance are lower. So all of those things combined shortened up our projected debt repayment, because you'll recall originally when we were looking at how we're going to finance the project, we were estimating that we were going to have debt service out to potentially 2080.
Yes.
Under our current model, we're paying off all of our debt by 2056. So, I mean, it's a big savings for the taxpayer.
2056?
Yeah.
Okay. And the other question is just for the people green or want green things, you did something with bonds as well?
Correct. So the entire developer's transaction received what's called a green qualification. So green bonds have become very popular in the market. There's about 23% of the muni bonds now are being marketed as green bonds. It requires an independent third-party analysis. They look at what the developer has pledged to do. They look at the nature of the project. They look at if the developer is trying to reduce its footprint. They look at the owner itself here, the Diversion Authority. Have we committed to using resiliency programs, things like that? And the bonds received a green qualification. And that qualification flowed not just the bonds, but to the note and to the revolver. And so if you look at overall, it's about 8 to 10 basis points. But when you're talking $1 billion of financing, it doesn't look, 8 basis points isn't big, but in that much value, it becomes a huge savings. And I would say that there was the other benefit that I think our project had during the sale, and speaking at the investor meetings, was there's a interest in our project nationally, because they view it as a potential resume builder. Like if you're an investor in this project and the Corps is talking about using this model in other projects, it sort of builds your resume as an investor. Well, we've invested in these Pabs, it worked. We want to go to the next big project, which might be in California or in Houston or some other place around the country. So we benefited a lot from that. And the other part of the good sale results was during the earlier part of this month. I think there was just there wasn't a lot of bonds being marketed and obligations, so we had really good results. I mean, we ended up with on a Pabs bond which had no geo pledge, no special assessment pledge. We had yields of 3.08 and 2.98. So I mean, that was really good for basically an unsecured revenue bond that had a 36-year repayment.
Additional questions from Mr. Schock? This is for information only. Thank you, John. Next order of business is the approved MOUs and agreement actions. Again, Mr. Shockley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have only one today, it's fantastic to be able to present this. And maybe just a little background that's probably more important than the MOU itself. You may be asking, why is the Diversion Authority entering into an MOU with the city of Drayton? that is near the Canadian border. Probably doesn't make a lot of sense to most people. So I thought it's probably more important to explain why are we even entering in this MOU. So part of the environmental approvals by Minnesota DNR require that we reconstruct a dam, and engineers can certainly answer the specific questions about the dam, to allow interconnectivity with, for fish to pass between that dam and Drayton. And so that they can connect, the fish can go back and forth, because currently the currently existing structure doesn't allow the fish to go back and forth. So as part of the environmental review process, permitting process, and Minnesota DNR, the authority is required to put that, rebuild that dam, so it allows for fish connectivity. If we don't reconstruct it, we can't proceed with the Red River control structure. And so getting this MOU in place is very critical, and it's beneficial to the authority, it's beneficial to the environment, it's beneficial to Drayton because it assists with some of the water storage issues. And so really this covers the costs and expense of associated with the property acquisition, utility relocation costs, and permit costs. And so the construction cost for this is ultimately governed by the PPA that the authority entered into with the Army Corps of Engineers. So can certainly answer any questions, but I thought giving you the global explanation was probably important.
Questions?
Move to approve.
Is there a second, please?
Second.
Mr. Costin seconds, moved by Mayor Mahoney. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes?
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Costin.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Reeds.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Next order of business is the Metro Flood Diversion Authority proposed staffing plan. Mr. Paulson?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm passing out a summary as kind of an extension of a request from Commissioner Campbell at the last Diversion Authority meeting, where I did talk about a proposal to add additional staff to the Diversion Authority under the project budget, basically. So just for some context here, the Diversion Authority through the Master Indenture of Trust has a cap on our administrative budget, which basically was contemplated to provide enough staff to keep the lights on at the Diversion Authority and ensure that there was always funding within the Master Indenture of Trust for key Diversion Authority staff members. As I've had a number of conversations with different board members about what the staff is going to look like during construction, it was impressed upon me that if we could reduce consultant load on this project and provide those same services through public staff, it would be a technique for us to be able to save some money long-term through the construction of the project. So I worked with the PMC, with Chris and Baki Gar, the engineering director, Jennifer Darling, communications director, as well as myself, to really define the positions that would be necessary during project construction that would be provided by consultants if we did not provide those services on the public side. And I did put those on page 2, shows the organizational chart that was presented to the Diversion Authority Board at the last meeting where we had the initial discussion. Commissioner Campbell asked if he could see a financial breakdown of what it looks like. And so the only change on the organizational chart from last month that I'd like to just note is I did remove one of the lands side support staff, and I included a deputy director of lands to assist Ms. Jody Smith in her role as deputy or as director of lands. due to some additional conversations that were had and really to ensure that we have some redundancy in our leadership on the lands side of things. Number of other reasons, but so if I could just draw your attention to the first page here of the handout. What we did is we did price all these positions using Gallagher, who is our salary consultant at the DA. And they gave us a 50th percentile kind of mid-range for all industries for these job descriptions. And I did ask Jennifer, Chris, and myself and others to contribute to defining these jobs. And so I think we were pretty accurate in our titles in what we were looking for. So you can see the ranges there. That's just the base salary range. The second column adds what the overhead benefit costs for each employee would be to give you an overall budget number for what the staffing would look like. And then the third column is the summation of what the consultant cost would typically run. I did not get quotes from our consultants on these positions. But I did use industry metrics for multipliers for engineering consulting firms through ACEC to calculate those numbers. Generally, they're about 3.2, 3.4 multipliers on the base salary, which is the first column that you see, to come up with the projected consultant cost. So just to bring all this data around, what we would be looking at if we stay status quo and continue to keep a baseline staff at the DA of just key director positions and continue to rely on consultants for these services, we would be looking at approximately $3.6 million per year on an annualized basis through the duration of construction, so for another 6 years. If we chose to take a route to move forward with hiring these positions as public staff members, we would see a savings of over $2.5 million per year, potentially, right? This is a scenario, of course. Salaries, consultant scope, and fee, all those things are pretty nuanced things. But I did my best to try to put the best information together for this analysis as I could. Just so we could have a discussion. I suppose I am asking for some guidance from the Finance Committee. I was considering bringing this to the Diversion Board and having a discussion, but I wanted to start that here to get the Finance Committee's perspective on this proposal. And if it's a negative, I'll probably pull it from the DA agenda and bring it back again in the future if anyone has any comments or concerns. So.
Mayor Mahoney.
Joel, my only confusion would be the P3 project hired Flint Communications to help them out. They've got a huge team. Our use of public relations in some ways would be less as a board. We're not going to be, I don't know a lot of big events we're going to do. I think the P3 will drive a lot of that. So I would just be curious, like digital creator and the editor and content specialist, some of that, can't that just be contracted out when it's needed? Because I don't know if you need a full-time person. That would be my only question, only because, Bernie, I don't know how big your communication team is. I think you're 4 or 5 now, and I think we're 8 or 9 now, Mike, right? And it's always hard for me to figure out what all these people do. But it's just opposite in my brain of what the Diversion Authority in some ways of what we do. We're going to have our meetings, we're going to have our events, but I don't know that we're going to have a lot of public. I mean, the normal communications, which she's doing now, seems to be fine. But what are we going to do? What other things are we going to do there? We need all these different people. And if that's just to talk about the project, that's one thing. But it's just, to me, I would just wonder, is there, and Mike, maybe you could answer that, sometimes you subcontract some of that so you don't have that standing cost of FTEs? Just a question.
Yeah, Mayor, sorry, Mike, before you go,
And Jennifer probably knows what that is, but I just don't understand those positions all the time, so.
Yeah, so just to stress, if we were not, if we didn't hire these positions on the public side, we would be utilizing consultants for those services. So I made very sure to make sure that that was a benchmark, that these are not additional services being provided to the program. They would be provided by consultants. And, you know, it's a good discussion that we can have with Mike too, just from his experience. Obviously, in FTE, you're going to have to keep them 100% busy. That's the whole intent. If you have a consultant that jumps in and out, then you potentially see some savings because you're only paying for them when they're on the project. Even though you're paying more, at the end of the year, they might still be less than having to have the burden of having a full-time employee. This analysis was set up to consider that these are 100% full-time employees, whether they're consultants or on the public side. You know, we could dig more into the details of what the proposed communications looks like during construction, but right now we have a digital content specialist, and that's Lily. She was here at the public outreach today talking about all the work she's doing with revamping the website and those sorts of things. So it is something that we need to do. And then, you know, I think just a general note on the communications side, we also got some feedback during the lands committee that there needs to be enhanced communications or a look at the communications in how we integrate the lands program, Cass County Joint, MCC JPA, and pull all of those people together so it's a unified communications effort, because right now it's very siloed and it maybe isn't as consistent as we want it to be. So I would say with all the communications going on the land side, you could almost, you know, justify just one communication specialist just focused on that, tracking all of the notices that go out, making sure it adheres to the process that was laid out by the legislature, and those sorts of things. So, sorry, Mike, I didn't mean to jump in on top of you.
No, that's quite okay. And just to the mayor's point, I mean, I think the one piece that perhaps is missing from an analysis like this is the number of hours that would be allocated to the function of the activity, like a consultant would do. Are these all 2,080-hour type positions? And then to the point raised earlier, what is the nature of the work after a certain activity or construction is complete? You know, what happens to those FTEs? Because I think to the mayor's comment, you know, the one thing that the consultant help does provide is the ability to blink that off when that function is no longer needed, without the liability long-term and that longevity of the liability of a FTE that may not be needed. So I think that would be helpful to see that analysis. I would think as this rolls forward, you know, what's the allocation of hours of some of this time? And maybe some of this is not quite full-time work yet, but some of it is, you know, later for a period of 2 or 3 years, and then it transitions to other activities, whatever it might be. But I do think that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's a good comment, Mike. Through this analysis, these are considered all full-time 2080 hours. But keep in mind, this is only proposed for during the duration of construction. So a majority of these positions, if not all of them, will change or go away at the end of construction. And that's always been the reason that the board and the DA has been using consultants to do this. I think we didn't have that long-term stability figured out until now. But now that we do, and we know we're going to have this bill of work for the next 6 years, I think in my mind, the analysis was what's the most effective and efficient way to do it, and ultimately maybe the cheapest. And perhaps that's pulling what is appropriate over to the public side that are full-time positions that are necessary for the project. But
Mr. Steen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hey, Joel, so we just signed a pretty significant master services agreement with Jacobs. I'm assuming it covered most everything we have on here because they weren't budgeted.
Some things, yes. I mean, some of the financial services items. So we have a financial manager. The finance director is housed under the administrative budget, so that's always been contemplated. But in the org chart, I did include a financial manager to provide a support staff for the finance director. Again, that's a position that if we didn't hire a support staff, Jacobs would provide those services to the finance director.
So maybe you answered my question, maybe you didn't. So when we prepared the master services agreement, we have not at that point approved these positions.
No.
So did you contemplate these positions available through or in the master services agreement with Jacobs?
No.
So we don't have those covered. So how are we gonna contemplate the savings? You know, how are we gonna say, yeah, we really replaced this position with somebody we hired internally? Because I assumed when we did the master services agreement, which between AE2S and Jacobs covered most all of this.
No,
So we didn't have, I think lands, I'm for sure we had in the master services agreement was 800 and some odd thousand a year.
I'm sorry, Rick. I misspoke. I thought you said something differently.
Okay.
No, all of these are currently considered, for the most part, with
Made
maybe
a couple
the
exceptions.
exception of some of the communications ones are considered in current master service
Okay, that's
agreements.
what's, yes.
Yes.
So
So
I'm
that
assuming-
agreement would be amended?
It would be, yeah, we would take a look at what we would need to unencumber in
So
order to
as we
support
hire
the scope.
these, if and when we hire these employees, we would make a appropriate adjustment to the MSA,
That's correct. We
That'd be
could
the
do it
intent
per
anyway.
employee, or we could do it as in.
However it works
yeah,
out.
However it works out, yeah.
I have an additional question. Are these in a priority listing, top to bottom?
No, Your
No,
Honor, they're
okay.
not. They are just listed as, just kind of, I could probably prioritize them because I think the lands director support staff are probably a higher priority right now, given what we're doing.
That was my point exactly.
Yeah.
That they'd be at the top of my list. Okay. Additional question?
follow-up question.
Mr.
And maybe-
Costin, please.
Yeah, I just had a clarification question. I know from the budgeting, we're getting in the weeds a little bit about what bucket of money do these funds come out of, but there's an administrative budget, which is your administrative team. There's several jobs listed here. Can you clarify for this group, which budget would these be charged to? Because there's a $1.6 million cap, lifetime cap on your admin budget. How do we know we're not over hiring? I'm assuming you're all over those numbers, but it seems like you should project out the admin budget, populate these positions within that, and demonstrate that we're not going over the cliff.
Maybe
John?
wants to answer.
Mr. Shockley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Microphone doesn't know it's working. Yeah, so great question. The administrative budget is capped at 1.6 million. And so that would cover, my understanding from the budgeting is that covers the dark blue. And your light blue positions would have to come out of the project funds. So if you think about the waterfall, the dark blue starts at the top. The thing that the board would have to remember is your light blue spots are always subject to if you have sufficient funds. And if you don't have sufficient funds, you'd have to lay off those people in the light blue right away, because you would have to pull them out of the comprehensive project fund. So those would be project related expenses for each of the light blue positions.
And a related question is there a clarification somewhere about what's considered an administrative staffing versus a project staffing? Because it seems the way we're just jumping out of buckets of funding with positions. And if there's a cap on one of them, categorically, I'd look at the finance manager and I'd say, well, that's clearly an administrative function. That should be in the administrative budget versus what you just said. So I'm just curious, what's the triggering mechanism for the authority to spend out of one of those buckets without going over the cap?
It's probably, pretty nuanced, of course, but as John had contemplated the master indenture of trust, the administrative budget was considered for the essential employees of the authority, long-term and in perpetuity, that would be necessary to do the functions necessary to keep the diversion authority operating. As we talk about these positions, these would be positions that are necessary for the execution of the construction of the project. At the end of construction, these jobs may or may not be necessary for the execution of operation and maintenance. But any financial support staff for the finance director is going to have to come from Onstead, Twitchell, EY, or Jacobs right now. And so the intent was, can we pull scope out of those contracts and create a public position? Obviously, get that cost savings. There's plenty of work to formulate a job that would be able to support the finance director through the duration of construction. And so it is a tough one, Kent, but I would say maybe the qualifier there would be if the job would be supported by a consultant or done by a consultant, it should be considered a project-related cost. If it is an essential position that needs to be done by somebody on the public staff related to the JPA or otherwise, then it should qualify as an administrative budget item. Just a proposal. I mean, I'm just kind of coming up with this,
Yeah, and I
the
think
way I
that's,
think about it.
that's a great explanation. That makes sense to me. But as you move forward through the life of the project, you got the construction phase and then the decision point about how do you restructure your staff.
Yeah.
Is somebody doing a cumulative projection through the construction phase to make sure we're not overextending the administrative budget?
I think, no, we haven't taken the long-term perspective yet. I mean, this would be the long-term perspective. This is what I would propose through the duration of construction. Now, if we were to move forward with this and we analyze how well it's working at the end of next year and it makes sense to pull additional out of a consultant somewhere, but eventually you're going to run out of time and it's not going to make sense to hire a full-time position for 1 year or 2 year, and it's going to be difficult to, hire that position in because somebody may not want to work for just a limited amount of time. But obviously, going into this, the folks that are considered for this job are going to have to understand coming into it that this is a limited term job. It ends at the end of construction. Could change as we develop the operation and maintenance organizational structure, but that hasn't been done yet, and so we couldn't give any kind of certainty that these jobs would continue on. But likewise, you can think about it after construction, we're also going to still have some level of consultants helping the DA on certain activities related to the AMP plan, the adaptive management program, just operation and maintenance in general, maybe capital projects that need to be done on the maintenance side. So there needs to be some staff that continue to manage that for the organization. But.
Yeah, and I don't mean to prolong the discussion, but I just want to be clear that everybody understands that there is a cap on the administrative budget. And it seems to me that this group should be cognizant as we make hiring decisions and permanent positions in some cases and temporary in the others. How is it measured against the cap? And I think that's kind of a critical control point, that somebody should be doing those calculations, is to avoid the inevitable of having to lay off a permanent staff person that thought that they had a career here, and we hit the cap, and now that's the end of your paycheck.
I might propose, Kent, I mean, that's a good comment. I might propose that, if this is something that we want to do, we set up a project-related administrative budget item, and you're funding that budget item by other places where you're seeing that savings. And, it's as long as the board and everyone feels comfortable that the sales tax are coming in above projections, we haven't touched our contingency, the idea of not having enough money to come in to pay project staff, would mean, the project's in dire situation there, right, John? And we have ways to prevent against that, but I guess in my mind, the chances of that happening and having to lay off people midway through construction would probably be pretty slim, because that would also mean we would need to cut services elsewhere, and we would have a lot of tough decisions to make. But
So what I did,
Ms. Darling, please, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I heard the conversation earlier about communications, and I just wanted to clarify a little bit that it's actually just a couple of roles compared to what was there before. So when I came on board, there were 8 to 12 consultants working across 2 different entities to fulfill the role that myself currently and 3 other part-time consultants are doing now. So there's actually more work than what we can handle right now with what we're trying to accomplish. And it's going to only grow once the construction picks up, because there's a lot of announcements that will need to happen based on the construction, the traffic, any type of crisis that might happen related to the construction, as well as just keeping the communications consistent in general. Having a consultant come on board sometimes for communications isn't the best idea because they won't be as familiar with the project or the wording or the consistency. So it's something to consider of why these roles are important.
Well, Jennifer, the issue is,
Mr. Costner, you want to finish
sorry.
your thought process? I
Well,
interrupted you.
I'll just close with what I thought I just heard. There's a cap on the administrative budget. We have certain positions that are funded within the administrative budget. And if the cup runneth over, we're just going to charge them to the project budget.
No,
Is that not what I'm
that,
hearing?
that's not correct. There's a cap on the administrative budget for the key personnel, which are indicated in the dark blue, which have been approved by the diversion board as far as organizational structure and hires. What the proposal is to maintain and house all of the light blue positions under the project budget. And the budget for those positions will come out of the savings that we realize from the consultants to the tune of over $2 million potentially a year. Over the course of 6 years of construction, that's a savings of $12 million. I really think it's something to look at. And, you know, what Jennifer mentioned as well is when you get a group of people working in an office together, there's a lot of real value to that too. When you have consultants working all over the place, there's some inefficiencies there as well. And frankly, they cost more. And so the idea here is ensure we have full-time positions, ensure we have sufficient scope to keep them busy all the time, pull that out of what's currently being offered by consultants, and create a kind of the corporate, or not corporate, but culture within the organization that would help to drive better results and which is appropriate. But I would say in order to track this, you would still want a budget and work with the finance committee to set an appropriate budget for project-related staff on an annualized basis and be tracking it that way. This would not give the DA the ability to just go out and hire willy-nilly. We need to get the board to approve the structure, and there needs to be a budget approved by finance and the board to support those positions.
So just to close, back to this cap, there's only 5 or 6 positions listed there that are subject to the cap. So clearly, you will likely maintain well below the cap that's within the master indenture of trust.
Correct.
Without jeopardizing anything as far as compliance with our debt instruments.
Right.
So that's all I was driving at is somebody keeping an eye on the cap, because that's part of our compliance protocol. And I don't see that in this analysis, but you just explained how you're tracking that. So I'm satisfied.
Thank you, Mr. Costner.
No,
Steve?
I think
Mayor Mahoney?
so Jennifer, the only thing, I don't know if Outreach went over what you're gonna do. Sometimes in our budget processing, you're now talking to me about you already are using some consultants, so your budget for last year might have been at some level. I think the difficulty we have is typically when somebody wants FTEs for our city, they tell us what else we're gonna get out of it. So the difficulty I don't know what all 3 of those people do, so there's obviously some roles or jobs you want for them. But even Joel always is saying I'm saving money, but in some ways we're probably spending some money right now with consultants, and you're utilizing them to do a variety of things. So normally when you're asking us kind of this question, we'd say, what do we gain by these 3 new positions? What do I presently pay and what am I paying now? Obviously, it might be the same if you bring them in-house and it's 3 times paying your consultant or whatever. I don't know all that. So when you're asking us as a team, No question that you know that you need them, but I sometimes, and we're just talking about this with Shots the other day, is does it go to outreach committee, they assess it and say, yep, this is what we need, and then push it to finance committee and say, we've looked at it, we agree with Jennifer, we need these 3 people, we think it'll do this or do that, and it's helpful to us. And that's why I'm just, we could save money or do whatever. So when you're asking us as a finance board, I think what Rick and I are used to look at is numbers of money, more money issues than you need the talent or you need the people. It's more, do I save some money? Is it costing more money? And to Ken's question, you know, overall, are we adding burdensome budgets because you're in the 1 cap area, but this is outside the cap area? But then Rick just asked you the question, you know, is that already in the Jacobs budget? Well, if it's already in that, we're actually decreasing costs. So yeah, the finance committee, we'd always love that. So I don't disagree with that. It's just that when you just look at an org chart, sometimes that's not the rest of the story. So Mike always has to bring the rest of the story to us in our budget meetings of what is this costing us? What does it change? Why, you know, why do you need it? Basically, so you can tell the taxpayer, we're doing this because we can enhance our services or whatever we're going to do. So I thank you for that clarification, because if it was just you up there and all those other things weren't going on. But it's just the dynamics that some of us think is the P3 is going to be the big player. We're going to quiet down and not do as much. You have good points that we really need to clean it even better in some areas. And so different than us putting out road closures so people know the roads are closed. You got to put that out there. If you don't have somebody putting it out there, consumers call and complain. So you don't want complaining consumers. So good.
It is a lot, Mayor, to just understand the complexity of all of the different contracts that we have and all the consultants working. And last month, I think in your board packet, I think I had a whole listing of all the consultants. And if you go through and count those up, there's over 180 people working on this program. And so what I did with this task was really, out of those 180 people, what's the appropriate service, and, you know, to provide the right support and create the right team that would provide more value or better value or more efficient value, and then ultimately save the authority money, is really what we're looking at here. But it is a change. I mean, this is something new. The board's never considered adding, you know, public staff to this level. It's only been up at this top level just to keep the lights on. And so can totally understand there's going to be a lot of questions and dialogue about this, and want to make sure that, and that's why I brought it to the committee today to have a discussion.
I'd just like to also add that we certainly don't want our RVA in particular leading the communications for this program, because we have other entities that we're partnering with, like the Corps and things. That information should come internally from MFDA. So it's really crucial that we keep that within our wheelhouse. Also, we've also saved already $500,000 this year in communications because we have already cut back before asking for these positions. So we're already at a cost savings. These 3 positions for communications in particular would not exceed the savings that we've already put in place.
Mr. Steen?
Thank you. Say, Joel, yeah, I'm supportive of trying to make things more efficient, more effective, and that type of thing. And you've got a big list here, obviously. And what's the timing? I mean, I'm looking at this 1 year, 2 years. I mean, and the reason I ask that is we've got about 5 or 6 years of construction ahead of us. Right. So, at what point in time is like, well, we're through this piece, we're through that piece. Now we need the people we've got on board that are temporary, because I have no idea, but I know it's not all going to happen this next year. At least I don't think it is. Hiring this many people, so you get down, you kind of hit the top of the hill, and then you're coming down. I'm hoping anyway.
Right.
And so I think timing is a big issue here, and you've got a lot of contracts out there. You've already got a significant number of master agreements with, you said 108 whatever contractors out there. I know they're not all full time. They're different things, that type of thing. Then we got a lot of the logistics just to figure out. We're going to hire somebody. We're going to limit our work with a contractor to make this pay, because if we're not going to look at that, then why are we hiring these people? I mean, you don't want to double up on effort and resources. So I mean, I'm supportive, but you've got a lot of planning ahead of you if you want to go down this path, because it's not just, oh, we're going to hire 3 communications support staff. We just engage Flint with 5 people or something. I think we met today.
Yeah. I think
What do you
it's-
do with that? I mean,
Yeah.
you got your good people from Flint, and we're going to hire 3 people, and and I know there's different perspectives here, and I don't need another justification for doing all that, but it's like, so that $500,000 goes away pretty quick when you hire 3 more, and you hire Jennifer, and we have Flint working. We didn't really save much at the end of the day. Maybe, and Jennifer, you don't really have to address it. I'm just for Joel, but I'm thinking it's. You got work ahead of you to justify this to the finance committee and to the boards. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I'm supportive if we can justify it and make sense in the long run. The long run here is a short run,
Yeah.
5 to 6 years, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about.
Well, but 6 years is kind of a long time.
Well-
And it's, if you're looking at $12 million, I mean, that's a
But
pretty
is
significant.
it 12 million? That's the piece you have to justify back. I mean, you say, well, if we did this with consultants, here's how many,
Well,
this is what we'd
but
expend.
that's already budgeted.
Perfect, and that's my example. So if it's 12 million, when you hire somebody in this list,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna come back and say, Joel, what did you change with the consulting contracts?
That's right.
Because that's how you're justifying this list. If you say, well, we just needed more people, because we're that much busier, I'm thinking, why didn't you tell us that today?
Right.
We're just gonna hire these people, we're not gonna change our consulting contracts, we're really not gonna save $12 million. I mean, so there's work, and I'm not saying I'm not gonna support this. You show us, you should, at least me, I'm just one person. So show me there is a savings, then we can justify it. I'm all for that.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, so just,
Maybe we can talk about how we logistically put that into play then, because I'm all supportive of that. I mean, that's my job, is to show you guys I'm saving money for the authority, right?
or spending it wisely, even if you're not saving it, spending it wisely.
Spending it wisely, let's put it that way, you're right. But I also need to budget for next year, and I also need to get board approval on organizational
right.
structure, right? So I can't even go out, I'm not gonna go out and hire any of these positions unless the board advises, yep, sounds like a plan, so.
So that goes back to my question. So what are you looking at next year? What are you looking at in 22?
Well,
We don't know. All we have is a big list. We don't know what 22 is.
yeah, no, I think the prioritization question that Bernie asked is a good one, and it plays right into what you're asking as well, is how would I prioritize? I'll tell you right now that, I mean, just hiring one person takes a lot of time, you know that. So to hire this complete staff next year would be probably very, very difficult. And then to integrate them into the program that quickly. So honestly, this is probably a 2-year hiring process to get these folks in place. And there certainly would be some prioritization that would go on there. So that's certainly something I could put into this table as far as priority.
Yeah, have a plan.
Yeah.
There's a big list, but is there a plan that goes with it?
So let me ask you this question, Mr. Paulson. Do you still want this as an actionable item today and take a vote up or down as to whether or not we support your staff?
I guess I'm torn, because I'd like to include this in the budgeting work that we're doing, and figure out what that looks like for next year.
I agree. I've seen the preliminary draft budget, and we've been working on that together. And so I can certainly understand your position as to why. And it's critical as to how we plan for 2022, I think. So if there's my suggestion would be is maybe that you rework this by tomorrow when you bring it forward to the board, and as to what your priorities are, of what those critical jobs might be, of 1 to 6, 1 to 7, whatever the case might be, and it might be easier for us to come to a conclusion. It's a suggestion. It's your prerogative. It's your line item.
I think I thank you for that advisement, Chairman Dardis. That's a very good idea, because, going out to the market to hire these people, I don't know if we can even find the people to fill these positions right now, right, with the tight labor market that we have. You know, if we can, we can. If we can't. But, you know, we've already struggled with a number of the director positions and filling those in a timely manner, and those have kind of lagged, and we're kind of getting over that hump now. These are not as probably specific specialties as a director of engineering or what have you. So, you know, I think I could do something like that and still bring it to the board tomorrow. I just, in my mind, if, you know, every month that goes by is, you know, money that we're paying that maybe we could have saved. And so, you know, to wait another 2 or 3 months to really get a formalized plan here on all this, you know, is going to cost us too. Right?
I agree that the timing is critical as we're preparing the 2022 budget.
Yeah.
So I agree with you completely on that. But a little more definitive, if that's the proper word. Commissioner Steen, then
To
Commissioner
support
Mahoney.
what you're suggesting, Mr. Chair, is like, that kind of goes back to Joel, have a plan. What is it you're going to do? You know, and I know you can't identify each position that you may get lucky enough, but I know you're not going to be able to physically manage 13 new employees in the next year. No. So who do you want, and what do you want? And that's the cost side. So if you hire this individual or this position, what are you going to do to offset that cost? Do you have a plan for that?
Yeah.
And that's when I go back to my original comment. So I support it. You know, I'll support going forward and doing this, but yeah, I can't just say, yeah, we're gonna support 13 FTEs with. Then show me the cost side that you're gonna reduce your costs as well. You can show me where you're gonna hire 13 people and spend $1 million.
Well, that's the intent of showing the consultant number here,
You know,
right?
like these costs here, $1 million, whatever.
So the consultant cost is our baseline cost, right?
Can you do that with your consultants? I mean, can you reduce that cost? That's what I'm asking.
Absolutely.
But I don't know that, because I don't know if you can hire that many people. So anyway, I think that's the same thing that Chairman Dardis is suggesting, is come back with a plan of some type.
I mean, I think the difficult thing, Rick, is, you know, are you proposing I go into each of the MSAs and pull out the specific scope and show, I mean, that would be a lot of negotiations with the consultants that would have to occur in order to, I could do that, but it would take some time.
It's your plan, Joel.
It would take some time.
You come back with, it takes time to hire these people as well,
It does.
because you're not gonna get them tomorrow.
Right.
So
If
you
I
got
can
time on
say
both
that,
sides.
actually, for some of the positions, it's a little bit difficult because there's new responsibilities coming on board with the construction, but for communications, we already pulled back those roles to have a cost savings, so we could get to this point. We do also have one person who's working as a consultant right now, Lily, who's working on the website, who is one of those positions where it would be great to at least make sure that we can shift her to a full-time position. So we have a cost savings there as well.
So to me, that's a perfect plan. We're paying 2.5 times salary. We're gonna hire this person at salary, and we're gonna reduce this cost here. That's a plan. I mean, that's pretty
Lily's
simple.
an easy one
Take
to
that
show.
long to do that one.
Right. No, not that one. That one would be.
Some of these other roles, though, don't exist now, so it's hard to say that there's a cost savings there because it's new responsibilities coming on board with.
No, they do exist in the budget already. All of
Sure.
these exist in the budget.
Sure.
Yeah. These are not extra staff. These are positions that are being filled by consultants at 3 times the cost of,
That's what I heard. Yeah.
you know, as
Okay.
what public labor would be. So just want to make that clear.
Mayor Mahoney.
Joel, the only difficulty I have is you have a present director of engineering, director of communications, so probably the people under them you kind of know you need. But we haven't hired the finance person yet, so that person that's underneath them is kind of like, okay, once your director gets in, what do they really need underneath them might be redefined as that person takes the job.
Right.
And then you have director of lands, which has 3 people underneath them, and they may discover a different way to be more efficient with it. I agree with Rick in some ways, you know, we can say we're saving from consultants or not using consultants. I think I don't want to micromanage you to re-micromanage those contracts, because you outline a method of management. But I do think the board sometimes has to see, because a lot of times you justify by staff by saying we save money. I mean, that's, you know, and we kind of get caught on that part rather than what do they add to the program and how will make you more efficient and how will make the program work better, which is what part of what you're saying is you need to build a team that works together that can do these things. And from our position, yeah, it probably will save us money because now you got a team working all together and doing things, not all over, and I can understand that. But as a finance team, when Bernie asked the question, do we endorse this or not? The difficulty is for us is we've seen the positions and we kind of are relying on you that you're going to save money. But you didn't show any hardcore figures that in the Jacobs, we got 2.5 million in these functions and we're going to come down to $1 million. And it might be a simplistic look at that, but it would be hard for finance if you had 2 times savings or the $12 million. It'd be hard for us not to want to do that because you're saving us money. So I think it's just mixing the things. It's a lot of employees, which we're kind of ingrained to say no. I mean, at 44 requests, what do we do, 22, Mike? I mean, we're just sometimes part of us is always no. Mayor Wallaker had a simple response to that. You get 50%, decide who you want. So, I mean, that made it a little bit difficult because it wasn't always clear to what you needed. I think you're asking what you want, but I think just as us in finance to endorse, it's easier if we can say, yes, we've seen the cost savings and we concur that it'd be a good idea.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, this isn't necessarily what I want. Nobody walks in and says, I want 40 employees to manage, right? But I do see that this is an option to save money for the authority and also add intrinsic value by, like you say, bringing people together as a team in the same office, working together, close on the same strategic things. But I understand. I think I can add some additional information to this and bring it to the board and have some discussion tomorrow. Doesn't have to be any action on this. Obviously, we can continue to work on it, but I just wanted to get some initial feedback from the committee today. And sorry, I made us all go a little bit long, but I think it was a good discussion and a very important discussion.
Mr. Chair? I would agree with Mayor Dardis is perhaps you might have some priority positions you want. So in some ways, it might be nice for you to know that, yep, we'll take 5 employees. We concur and you can go hire right now because you need those critical employees right now. Because I agree with your team and yourself. Sometimes it's hard to fire or hire people, right?
Yeah.
So it's a difficult time. Now in our communications, I think we had 22 applicants. So I think in communications, you'll find people out there, but would not like to hold you down. I don't have a finance director, so I know that a next guy down is not your next hire, but your finance guy probably is pretty high up there. That is, to his point, if you just maybe prioritize who's my top 5 I need now, if we approve it tomorrow, then you know you can go ahead and start hiring.
Yeah. Okay.
So this item will not be voted on today. It will be continued, and we'll go to item D. Eric. Mr. Dodds.
I've been requested to
AE2S.
talk fast. I have the next 3 items in your packet. The first 2 are land acquisition directives, and the third one is a monthly status report. The first land acquisition directive is for the remaining properties in North Dakota that we have not passed land acquisition directive for yet. Just a bit of a reminder procedurally, we bring these land acquisition directives through the Finance Committee as a step in the process to authorize the joint board to go spend money on buying lands. The list here in this one is rather long, and there's some maps attached that identify all those properties. We have done quite a bit of the land acquisition directives for properties in North Dakota, and we were in the process of doing a cleanup to bring forward all the remaining properties. And in that sort of review and audit process, we identified a handful that somehow slipped through the cracks. And so you'll notice on the map, there's 1 or 2 properties that are on the channel that have already been acquired. And you'll see just a few here listed that are already owned by the Cass County Joint Board. So Some of this is maybe good housekeeping, where we're identifying the land acquisition directive numbering system so that it's all logged in the system correctly, but admittedly, the acquisition perhaps got a bit ahead of the LAD, which most of those were voluntary, and so I guess that's a good situation. But so that's a summary of this. I'm happy to go through any more details. There is a budget attached to this, $48 million. That's consistent with the overall lands program budget, which is part of the overall project budget as well.
Questions for Mr. Dodds?
Similarly, if I might, the next land acquisition directive is for the remaining properties in Minnesota. Very similar situation there. We had already approved an LAD for a bulk of the properties in Minnesota that were in Clay County. Most of these properties on this list are in Wilkin County. And some of the delay here was because of the final determination of the easement boundaries and things, which has been established for a bit of time, but the LAD now is cleaning up all those and bringing forward the last remaining parcels. So,
And that dollar amount in Minnesota is what?
the dollar amount in Minnesota, scroll up a little if you will, Peggy, rate. Well, that's a good question. Dollar amount in Minnesota is just under $3 million, $2.9 million.
Thank you.
So I am seeking committee approval of both of those land acquisition directives.
Thank you, Mr. Dodds.
Move to approve.
Both items, D and E, Minnesota and North Dakota. Thank you, Mayor Mahoney. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mike Redlinger. Been moved and seconded to approve the land acquisition directives as presented by Mr. Dodds for both Minnesota, which is item E, and North Dakota, which is item D. Is there any further discussion?
If I might,
Please,
just
Commissioner
have a
Steen.
question, not on the motion per se, but on one of your maps, the first map with the North Dakota. So some have been overlooked. There's a couple of parcels like right in the middle of the channel.
Yeah, those are parcels that, again, I think had intended to do an LAD for all those several years ago. As we were reviewing the inventory of LADs for the parcels that are needed for the project, those were a few that showed up where we didn't have a record of having the LAD approved.
Oh, so
yet.
we've gone through the process. We just
Right.
don't have the, okay.
It's a good
Thinking,
housekeeping
Really,
measure,
that's,
yes.
that's a big housekeeping item if it's right in the middle there, but okay.
Great question. Again, we have a motion on the table. Is there any other questions for Mr. Dodds or any discussion? Hearing none. Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Costin.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Reeds.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Item F is the property acquisition status report. Again, Mr. Dodds.
In your packet is the status report. I'm showing on the screen here the second page of that status report. I'd like to just point out a few things on this. This report was produced a little over a week ago. So there's been some recent activity with the Cass County Commission approving the use of quick take on about a dozen parcels needed for the Drain 27 area. And so with the green parcels at 599 and with the red at 86 plus the additional dozen or so, we're right around 700 parcels acquired to date. Again, several of those are through an eminent domain action that's ongoing. The other thing I would just note regarding the eminent domain actions, while it's over 90 parcels now, there's about 30 property owners. And so most property owners own more than one parcel. The hearings for those are scheduled to start early next year, and they continue through the rest of '22. The most recent actions, we don't have a hearing date set for those yet, of course, but anticipate those, if we don't reach a settlement, will likely be in '23. So, otherwise, the rest of the report, I think you're familiar with that. And given my direction to speak fast, I'll hold for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Dodds? This report is not an actionable item. It's just for information. Any questions? Thank Thank you, sir. Our next meeting is going to be November 17th. And is there any other business that any of the Finance Committee would like to bring forward at this time? I have one comment again in the review of the report by Mr. Shockley and the closing and all of that. Again, to all of the team members that were engaged and involved in this from top to bottom, when we have a savings of 50 million and change, as Mr. Shockley likes to talk about, I think $610,000. We thank you for all those efforts, and again, another milestone for the Diversion Authority. With that, we stand adjourned.